Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I welcome you all to the Act4Earth National Dialogue, an information session on the World Sustainable Development Summit 2024. The topic of our discussion today, as we all know, that we had a successful G20 presidency of India, and we have seen conclusions come out of that summit. And now, as we move towards COP28, we are in here for this informative session and panel discussion that will lay out what should be the ideas that we take forward from G20 to COP28. We have a distinguished panel in front of us, and now I would like to request our Honorable Director General to give her welcome remarks. Ma'am.
Very good morning to all of you, and thank you so much for being with us today. I'll say not a great day, but perhaps better than yesterday, because all of us are perhaps in the gas chamber. And that definitely, I'll say, it becomes a warning for each one of us that what we are doing perhaps is not adequate, and we need to do much more so that the planet doesn't become like what Delhi is facing today. And that is what we at TERI are trying to do. I welcome you all to the Act4Earth National Dialogue on Road to Dubai from G20 to COP28. And as I said, thanks for joining us today. And perhaps most of you are aware of TERI's flagship event, World Sustainable Development Summit, which was launched in 2001 as DSDS, Delhi Sustainable Development Summit. It's only the independently convened platform on the topic of sustainable development and climate action based in Global South. The summit series has brought together, it's very high profile that we are very fortunate to bring together 56 heads of states and government, 13 Nobel laureates, 126 ministers, 1932 business leaders, 3,023 speakers, and almost 40,000 delegates in last few years. Of course, 2 years we had to do virtual, and hopefully this year it will be all in person. The next edition of the summit is due from 7th to 9th of February 2024. It will be held in India Habitat Center, where we are. And the broad rubric of leadership for sustainable development and climate justice, that is what we are going to discuss in the next year. And we sincerely hope that all of you will be able to join it. And I'm saying that because it's always different to have it in person versus hybrid or virtual. So in-person meeting which will be held this year, and we hope to have very senior delegations coming, speakers next to none. And it goes without saying the discussions which takes outside meeting halls is very enriching, and it's the time for each one of us to act. We all have witnessed G20, and I'll say that India has raised the bar of how the G20 discussions and outputs should be, because it's not just a meeting which is moving from one country to the other. We need to make these meetings more action-oriented, and that's what we tried to achieve. The New Delhi Leaders' Declaration highlighted the need for green development, climate action, just transition, and accelerating the progress on sustainable development goals. India emerged as an influential voice of the Global South during its G20 presidency, and in its remaining term, we should focus on making lifestyles for environment a global goal. And I'll say the success of life in India is great, even what we have achieved till now, because even if you talk to a school children, they also talk, they know about that there is something called life, and they also know that they can also contribute in reducing the GHG or moving towards a cleaner planet. So that is something, because we want to make it a household movement in which every citizen participates, is through life. We all must realize that we all are impacted by the climate change, but at the same time, we all are contributors to the changing climate. And it is now time to act, and that action cannot be by the governments alone, it cannot be by the industry alone. It will succeed only if we all are partners in realizing this mission of green energy, clean energy, and environment sustainability. As we move towards COP28 in Dubai, most of the discussions have been around the principles of mitigation and loss and damage. However, it is important for countries to put the focus on adaptation and work towards reaching a concrete outcome on global goal on adaptation as mandated by the Paris Agreement. It's also like, I personally believe that let's move, rather than putting that who should be doing what, it should also be what we can do with the limited finances we have. We also have to raise our voice, what is important for the global south. We talk about loss and damage. Have we defined what is loss, what is damage, what is the kind of money available? So all these things are extremely important. While these are negotiations at a government-to-government level, at a much senior level, let's also look into, in small little baby steps, what we can do. And that is what I'm looking forward to, discussions today and always. Let's see how do we make this planet cleaner. Thank you very much once again, and welcome to the workshop today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dhawan. Now I would like to request Dr. Shaili Kedia, who is a senior fellow and the curator of WSDS, to give a very brief presentation.
Thank you, Hina. And a very welcome to all of you at the event today. So a very brief background on Act4Earth, and some of you have put on the badges, and if you want the badges on Act4Earth, please collect the same from the registration desk. The Act4Earth initiative was launched at the valedictory session of the 21st edition of the World Sustainable Development Summit with an objective to drive ambition and urgent action on climate change and sustainable development through knowledge, dialogue, and capacity building. Act4Earth has two components, the COP28 Compass and the SDG Charter. So when we are heading towards COP28, and we are very optimistic about the outcomes that will be achieved at COP28. It is important to bear in mind that when we talk about cumulative CO2 emissions, and of course in this chart you only see the same for G20 countries, we do see that some countries do account for a higher share, such as US, EU, and China, and then some countries are on the lower side. And when we talk about per capita emissions, then that is even, the picture is even more stark, wherein if we just look at the G20 countries, you have Saudi Arabia on the other end, followed by Australia, US. And then we have on the other end, Brazil, Indonesia, and India with the lowest per capita emission. As a part of Act4Earth initiative, we did take a theme on lifestyle for environment, and we developed a consumption index, and we see that India is one of the lowest consumer, and this was only for G20 countries. And then, of course, in terms of the score, on the other, we see in the top three, in terms of the lowest consumption, India, Indonesia, and African Union. And on the other end of the spectrum, we see Canada, Germany, and the US. Having said that, coming to COP28, one of the aspects we have seen is that this year, we had the UN report which says that for the very first time since the adoption of SDGs, there is sliding back of sustainable development goals. So we do see that COP28 agenda in the blue zone and outside the blue zone in the negotiating space, the outcomes do lead to a stronger interface with the SDGs. From the G20 declaration, we do see that the G20 declarations has called out for the finance of US dollar 5.8 to 5.9 trillion in the pre-2030 period, and also 4 trillion per year for clean energy technologies by 2030. So the action really is in the decade that we are now. We also saw the adoption of Green Development Pact, and India very successfully internationalized lifestyle for environment through its high-level principles on sustainable development, and as well as the Green Development Pact that was formulated at the, which finds its mention in the G20 declaration. And of course, we'll have Professor Chaturvedi enlighten us, and we were happy to be a part of that journey as well. On energy transitions, we are seeing a lot of minilateralism through JETPs, but again, it is very important to consider holistic picture when we talk about just energy transitions, so that we look at energy systems as a whole, which consists of supply and demand sides. In addition to that, we do not want to add to the debt burden of developing countries. So this was one of the aspects that came out through that policy brief. When we talk about adaptation, the G20 declaration talks about adaptation. So in that regard, when we move towards COP28, the outcome of the global goal on adaptation process is extremely crucial. And one of the aspects that came out through our policy brief and stakeholder consultation is that it should not just be linked to the global stocktake process, but also to the new collective quantified goal on finance, which also has been very clearly highlighted in the G20 New Delhi declaration. And of course, finally, as was mentioned as a starting point, there is a need to strengthen the SDG climate interface, both in terms of vertical as well as horizontal internalization at national and subnational levels, through policy innovations such as green budgeting and green public procurement, which also contribute to the accelerating of SDGs. So these are our key messages. I would request colleagues on the dais, you have a policy paper in front of you. We would be launching the same, and just request one more copy of the policy brief. So we will be requesting all the speakers on the dais to launch the policy brief. But before that, very briefly on what we are trying to say, this policy brief is focused on the global goal and adaptation process. And one of the important things is, as mandated by Article 7.1 of the Paris Agreement, it explicitly links the global goal on adaptation to the temperature goals, which in a way could be interpreted as being seen in the risk-based framework, so that we have to be very mindful of tracking the climate impacts now itself, and then addressing the risks through adaptation measures. And goals and indicator framework, that is one of the key outcome which we envisage at COP28. And in fact, for most of the stakeholders, it is like the outcome on global goal and adaptation is going to be a key determinant to determine the success of COP28. And there are lessons to be learned from the SDG framework, including for indicators where there is not enough information. So you could put in as tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, and then eventually that could evolve. And focus on means of implementation. This has been a unanimous voice on the Global South front, whether it's the African group of negotiator, whether it's the LMDC, or whether it's the G77 group, or even the least developed countries. So this is going to be absolutely essential. Of course, it has been a contentious issue in the overall framework. Reporting formats for countries can be simplified. And again, the point which directly borrows from the G20 declaration is this entire outcome needs to not just be linked with GST, but the NCQG, which is going to be completely crucial. G20 declaration clearly calls for moving of climate finance from billions to trillions. And other than that, paradigm shifts are needed in redefining the problem statements. At the moment, it is framed in the context of countries. But when we talk about adaptation, it needs to go more disaggregated, talk about communities, people, ecosystems. So that is the other broad message coming from the paper. So requesting all of you to please open the ribbon, and over to Meena.
Thank you, Dr. Kedia. I would request our esteemed panel to please officially unveil our policy brief.
just like to acknowledge, Mr. Rashmi, who very ably guided us in this process for preparing this policy brief. He is not here, but, just wanted to acknowledge him.
Thank you, Shelley. We are really delighted to have Mr. Majid, who is Deputy Chief of Mission at the Embassy of UAE, who are also the host for the COP28. I would request Sir to please give his remarks.
Thankfully, I don't have my speech upside down. Good morning, everyone. I would like to extend my gratitude to the Energy and Resources Institute and Dr. Viba Davan for the kind invitation to engage in today's pivotal discourse. As the UAE prepares to host COP28, we remember the prescient words of Mahatma Gandhi. The future depends on what you do today. Following India's successful leadership in the G20, we anticipate COP28 not merely as a convention, but as a defining moment for cooperative action. In pursuit of a just and orderly energy transition, we acknowledge the inexorable shift from fossil fuels. However, this transition must be responsible. We must rapidly build the energy systems of tomorrow, free of unabated fossil fuels, while comprehensively decarbonizing energies we have today, and tackle both energy supply and demand. To build the energy system of the future, the COP28 presidency is calling for global stakeholders to triple renewable energy capacity to 11,000 gigawatts, dramatically scale low-carbon hydrogen, and double energy efficiency by 2030. To decarbonize the energy we use today, we are seeking to retire coal plants early and are calling on oil and gas companies to eliminate methane emissions and routine flaring by 2030. Commit to net zero for scope 1 and 2 emissions by 2050, amongst other commitments. These measures are substantial, challenging, and achievable. And we are convening both producers and consumers of energy to collaborate and drive an integrated response to attack emissions everywhere. However, vision without implementation is but a ship adrift. Addressing climate finance is imperative. Finance is a critical enabler of climate action and how we turn ambitions into reality. However, it is not currently available, accessible, or affordable enough where it is needed. First, we need to rebuild trust by delivering on historic pledges. And then we must reform the architecture of the global financial system to ensure both public and private capital delivers on our global ambitions. Trust has broken down between many parties. To rebuild it, we must first fulfill the historic pledges. The COP28 presidency is encouraged by the commitments made by many, but contributions are still falling short. We need all contributing countries to deliver on the annual 100 billion commitment in climate finance made at the COP15 and to ensure a strong replenishment of the Green Climate Fund. We must then build on the progress made at COP27 and operationalize the loss and damage fund and funding arrangements, as well as provide early pledges. To deliver a just transition, we will need trillions, not billions. But the current global financial system was developed without consideration for how to enable effective global climate action. We need to reform the architecture of the global financial system to expand concessional funds, lower risk, and attract private capital at a multiple. We then need to unlock the power of voluntary carbon marks and green capital markets by ensuring high integrity standards. Thirdly, we will focus on people, nature, lives, and livelihoods. Climate change will affect all of us, even if we meet the goals and ambitions of the Paris Climate Agreement. People and planet must therefore be at the heart of the climate process. We must ensure that we have the enablers in place for adaptation, particularly finance. Then we need an all-of-the-above approach that leaves nobody behind and elevates previously neglected topics up the climate agenda, such as health and fragility. Finance will be necessary to delivering our ambitions across nature conservation, health, and support for vulnerable communities. We must adopt a comprehensive and robust framework for the global goal on adaptation and clear targets while addressing the disparity between mitigation and adaptation in finance. We then need an all-of-the-above approach that leaves nobody behind. We must break down silos, develop integrated and holistic responses, and ensure that previously neglected topics are given the attention that they deserve. This ranges from protecting and restoring ecosystems, food systems, and fresh water, to building resilient societies with a focus on health and fragility, among other priorities. The final pillar I will discuss today is that everyone is welcome because everyone is needed. No single party has all the solutions, and success depends on contributions from every country, every community, and every citizen. COP28 must bridge the trust gap between the North and South and build a platform for progress through partnership. We must mobilize for the most inclusive COP ever and formalize future participation in climate action. Climate change will greatly affect future generations, and so COP28 has appointed the first youth climate champion and established the largest ever youth climate delegate program. Climate action is not just a responsibility of national governments, and so we will welcome over 1,000 mayors to attend COP28. The private sector will have a crucial role in delivering our climate ambitions, and so we will also host a business and philanthropy climate forum and support and host over 200 climate tech startups to attend. We need both the process and the results to be inclusive. We are working with parties and non-state actors to ensure that climate finance advances gender equality and is inclusive of indigenous peoples. Advancing climate education around the world will be a key tool as well to empower communities to create the conditions they need to succeed in our future world. The UAE is poised to transform the promises of today into the actions of tomorrow. As we advance towards COP28, we stand united in our call for bold ambitions, inclusive participation, and unwavering commitment to forging a sustainable, equitable, and thriving world for all generations. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Majid. Now I would request Professor Chaturvedi to please give his remarks.
Good morning, everyone. Congratulations to TERI for getting us all together for this very important dialogue that is there today. I congratulate Dr. Vibha Dhawan for excellent context setting this morning, and the presentation that Dr. Shelley Kedia made, I think, was very substantive. I think we badly need to bring in empirical data together in terms of how this transition is happening and in what direction we are going forward. Majid explained the priorities that are there before COP28, and I think as all my colleagues here would agree, I see Ambassador Manjeev Puri and Lavesh here, the issues are largely in terms of how the financing would be done. In the G20, India has evolved consensus. All the 83 paragraphs that have come up have captured this essence. Now the principles are there. We need to turn this into action. And when we are talking about action, the crux is coming in more around the finances that are necessary. The polarization that we are seeing at the global level is very much clear in terms of how the trust funds that were envisaged in the beginning and how COP27 delivered, what kind of impediments we are seeing and what kind of polarization we are seeing in terms of a block movement from one to another. And that's where I think the G20 declaration, when it talks about tripling of renewable energy across the globe, the idea of we bringing together the biofuel alliance, they are the positive ones which are very much there in terms of how we are looking forward in terms of our concerted collective efforts. So there is little doubt about it. We have seen ISA going up. We have seen now the Biofuel Alliance. The Minister for this portfolio, Ambassador Puri, has been talking in terms of how Biofuel Alliance can bring in more energy. TERI has also given the leadership that is required here. So that I think is something where we have the collective positive convergence. The issues that Dr. Shelly Kedia alluded to on JETP, the Just Energy Transition Partnership, we are seeing that impact of polarization. So the efforts to get North and South together, and some who are thinking of certain positions for specific purposes, I think we need to bring collectively the divergences that are happening. The 2015 position that Prime Minister Modi took to bring North and South together, bring in collective convergence together, and in fact 2015 all the three mega agreements that we did, whether it was Agenda 2030 for SDGs, Addis Ababa Action Agenda, which was more for finance and collective efforts on illicit financial flows and global tax evasion, and the third was the Paris Climate. On all three, we have seen how North and South can work together. India's growing commitment for triangular cooperation, for bringing North and South together, I think is an important dimension in terms of how we look at the issues. But the dimensions of bringing forestry in, and the presidency COP28 has brought in the nature-based solutions as one important area under NBS that has contributed in terms of how we are looking at. Probably more efforts are needed and more commitment is needed in terms of how we address issues within multilateralism, and that's where we need to focus on. The current conflicts are in any case contributing to huge display of devices that are contributing and accelerating the climate change in all possible ways that are there. Probably the efforts that are needed to accelerate SDGs are going in the direction which are very unfortunate. The issues which are, I think, important here are at three levels which I think are important. First and foremost, as I said, we need to look at finances and the possibilities. The fragmentation of finance across the globe in terms of how we look at the SDG aligned finance, how we look at green finance, how we look at the possibility of issuing green bonds and the possible subscription of them both at the national and the subnational level, and the ability to generate a larger pool of resources. That I think is the first issue for us to address. COP27 had 4 major recommendations in terms of proposing a roadmap for convergence of this. Unfortunately, movement hasn't happened, and that's the direction probably we need to go in. The G20 Delhi has already given directions that are important in terms of how we look at the processes that are there, and some of that I just now mentioned. All the 5 dimensions that I just now mentioned from the G20 declaration, I think are absolutely important. What Shelikedia mentioned in her presentation, it talks about the principles of life, the lifestyle for sustainable development as it is being called. And this has 4 major components which are extremely important for us to see how they relate to the title of this seminar of Delhi to Dubai, the idea of G20 to COP. The first and foremost, which the slide very rightly captured, is about sustainable consumption and production. How do we define sustainability of consumption and production? And this is where the development dimension comes in. We cannot leave aside the process only for environmentalists or for economists who are specializing in environmental economics. It is very much a question of mainstream economics of our development paradigm. Delhi G20 declaration has given a major mandate for development paradigm which neoclassical or neoliberal hasn't endorsed. So this is a paradigm shift in favor of sustainable consumption. So how do we bring in sustainable consumption? Several of the global enterprises, several of the governments of OECD countries have been opposed to the idea of bringing any kind of restriction on consumption. But this is about circular economy. This is about bringing in new technological adaptations for new products and new consumption patterns. And that would require greater innovation and greater connect with the circular economy. So if we have to go on that track, what kind of financing mechanisms are needed? And that probably would bring in the point that I made in terms of reducing the fragmentation of finance. Because if we are dividing the house into several different pockets, then the entrepreneurs have huge challenge in terms of accessing capital. And that's where we need to intervene and promote the kind of funds that can provide legitimate solutions that are there. There was a side event we did as part of the Life Task Force at the Development Working Group. Ambassador Manjeev Puri was there with me. We did it in Trivandrum. The idea that is coming up is in terms of reducing this fragmentation in finance. The second component comes in as to what vehicles we are using for promoting this. The vehicle of social enterprises and the push towards social enterprises, as India has established the stock exchange for social enterprises, enterprises which are not solely profit driven, enterprises which have social objectives, and the number fortunately is continuously multiplying, and not just in Asia or other continents, but in the mainland US. You would find more and more private sector companies that are coming up which are contributing towards social enterprises. So they are not purely profit driven. They have the social objectives in mind, and fortunately they have survived the kind of pressure that financial sector and sort of brought in with excessive financialization strategy of the stock market. And this trend has to be reversed. So the COP28 should turn this endorsement of the Delhi G20 into action. And when this would happen, we would create a new vista for movement of the private sector. They may be a MSME, but MSMEs are the ones which are contributing to the huge economic growth that India and China are displaying. And as the IMF report very clearly shows, 42% of the economic growth of 2023-24 would come from China and India together. So we need to see the MSME energy that is getting directed towards this. The third important point is in terms of the measurement of this, and we have been emphasizing. Fortunately, UN Secretary General at the G20 also accepted, and Prime Minister Modi in his concluding speech also mentioned that we need to go beyond GDP measurements. And this is something that some of us in academics have been talking for last 2 years. We need to go beyond GDP as indicator, both for qualifying for various financial assistance and measurement. And when we are going towards well-being measurement from GDP alone, we need to bring in what Partho in his Partho Dasgupta in his report to UK Treasury has said. It's a 600-page, very nice report which captures the well-being measurement, bringing in biodiversity, bringing in the kind of challenge that Dr. Vibhadavan just mentioned in the beginning of the air quality. So this is something which requires the kind of working conditions for farmers, for entrepreneurs, for MSMEs, and bring in access to clean water, health services in many dimensions which are important for sustainable development goals. So that, I think, is contributing in terms of how we bring in measurement. COP28, already there are 3 side events which are planned and are already there at the event listed. I think it would be important for us to take that direction. The fourth and the last, and I think COP has little to contribute, but fortunately the G20 has done enough. But I'm sure the environmentalists also have to do a bit introspection on that front, and that is to bring ethics back in our framework. And this is where we need it for international relations. The G20 declaration has emphasized in terms of the cultural dimensions of localization strategy for development agenda 2030. South Korea was very keen to have at least one SDG goal dedicated to culture. And I think somehow we have unmindfully adopted development strategies which have debased local development priorities and local connect of development. And this is also causing the indiscriminate investment and production. Some countries of the global south have become pollution havens because of the huge disconnect of what they consume and what they produce. This disconnect is contributing hugely in terms of how our lifestyles, which we want to be amended, are not getting amended, because the economic interest, the production structures and architecture, and the development priorities, there is a huge gap that the development philosophy which we adopted in late 80s under Washington Consensus has completely swept away local culture. I think these 4 points are important in terms of how we go from Delhi to Dubai. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chaturvedi. I would now like to request Dr. Bhandari to give his comments.
Thank you for inviting me here and waiting for me to speak after such an amazing panel, an amazing set of interventions and visions that have been shared. So I'm going to try and take a slightly different approach, and I'm going to just share some thoughts as they emerged while the panel was sharing their thoughts. We have generally failed in what we set out to do, and I would like us to just put that straight up front. We have made amazing progress from where we started. That's absolutely true. But there is a serious problem, and that problem essentially has to do with the world order that is not just changing at the upper level, but is changing in its very DNA. The West has released its intellectual domination of the world by not sharing the funds that it had committed. The East is stuck on something that the West is anyway not going to be able to share. So we must stop, I feel, just waiting for these funds to come. They're not going to come. Given that fact, where are we going to be as we go forward? That's the first, and I think it's a very serious problem, because whether we like it or not, it will be very difficult for the Western democracies to be able to share such large funds at this time. At the same time, the technologies that we have as of now are too costly. So even if we had these huge investments coming into the developing world, it's not really clear whether it will be able to absorb these kind of funds. High levels of debt have really been a problem historically in many developing countries, and there is no other way to get these kind of investments but through debt. So there is that challenge as well. The third challenge is, even if we did make all of these investments and we did get mitigation under control, there is a serious issue related to the expanding human footprint. So now there are these two or three challenges. We don't really have the funds. If we had them, then there is a problem. Because it's not really clear that the global south would be able to absorb them. And there is a problem of the expanding human footprint, which even with all of these investments, is going to be an issue. Now, given all of this, what should we do? And now, I think we need to at least start by asking us these questions. It's not that we have completely failed. There are still some positives. And let me start with one. And that was what happened at the G20 meetings. Surprising that we got a consensus. How did we get that consensus? Of course, it was the efforts of the Prime Minister. Of course, the fact that the Prime Minister, in India at least, was able to spread the awareness of something as important across the country. But it was also because the global north came onto the same table. So it would not have happened otherwise. So there is that one single, I think, success that I've seen in the recent past. But to get funds is going to be a challenge, let's face it. So exactly, and that point is what I'm going to base most of my comments on. The institutions that exist are going to be the only way we'll be able to quickly get this whole act coming together, and that happens to be the MDBs. The MDB reform process has to be not just accelerated, it has to be enhanced, and it has to increase by many factors. We do have, it's not just the IMFs and the ADBs, there are many multilaterals, and I feel that there is that one great tool that we have to get this whole investment thing going. They have the expertise internally, they have the tools, they have the products, the debt products, the investment products to be able to manage some of this. The second issue, and that has to do with the technologies. You're not going to get markets working in this space until we get the technologies right. And unfortunately, storage of energy is still very costly. We have to get that one single element right for us to be able to kickstart investments coming in from the private sector. Now, so if I was to look into this, I would say this is the time to invest massively. But who should invest in this? Should the developing countries be doing that, or should it be the West? Developing countries such as India are trying, both in the private sector and the public sector. But this is where the West can play a massive role. You have to invest in the technologies, and if there's one technology I can identify, it will have to be storage technology. The third part, and that's already been talked about, and increasingly being talked about, is sustainable development. But let me just start. Sustainable consumption, I'm sorry. Sustainable consumption is not lesser consumption. Sustainable consumption is different form of consumption. And unfortunately, at least in the media when I read, a lot of people equate sustainable consumption with consuming less. Actually, it's not true. It has to be different kinds of consumption. And just to clarify, if you consume less and it impacts growth, the whole process of investment in technologies and in sustainable development is going to take a hit. So that's not what we are talking about here. But sustainable consumption is something which is really critical. And I think the Prime Minister has identified, and rightly so, and the Project Life that has been talked about is a step in the right direction. But I'll give you one example of how sustainable consumption can actually make a great difference. I'll use the example of electricity usage in India. There are 3 peaks of electricity usage in India. One is the early morning, the other is the afternoon, and the third is in the evenings. The early morning peak essentially happens because people get up across urban India in the morning and switch on the water motors. Because water is supplied in the morning. That's a time when you don't have solar power. Right? So just a shift of water supply from the morning to the afternoon can actually reduce the requirement of energy or electricity. Right? So that's one very simple step that can reduce some of the consumption requirements of electricity. The second major difference that one can make is this huge consumption of energy that we have in the evenings. And there are many different possibilities there, and that's already being discussed about. But that's exactly what we need to focus on if we want to reduce the impact that we have on the environment. The last part I'd like to make is this, that there is a problem on the industrial front. There is a lot of usage of carbon. However, that's actually the least of the issues, because the bulk of our carbon emissions are coming in from the energy sector, and that sector essentially has to do with the usage of electricity in the evening, especially for countries such as India, which are highly dependent on solar power when they're talking about renewable energy. So the problem is not so massive as we think it is. It's actually a single major problem which can very easily be addressed once we focus on the possible solutions on that just one thing. So rather than thinking of many objectives and dividing up our resources amongst trying to do many different things, at this point in time when we are constrained from funds, we are constrained on technology side, we're constrained on a global cooperative environment, is to focus, have fewer objectives and focus on the ones that are really important. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bhandari. I would again like to thank the panel for this well-rounded approach and understanding that we have now of where we go from G20 to COP28. Our next panel is scheduled for 11:30. Yes, Ambassador Puri?
Can I just say something before we
Sure, please.
And I want to congratulate the UN on having achieved this consensus on the loss and damage fund. I think we're talking a lot of big things, but here is actually an achievement, and here is an achievement which will come for endorsement there. This was a critical aspect of looking at what we will do. The rest of it, politics, money, finance, technology will go on. But here was a specific thing, and you actually managed to break the ice. Congratulations to you, and we hope that all of this will go forward.
Thank you, Ambassador Puri. We will break for tea and we will be back at 11:30. I would also request the speakers of the next panel to please join us in the front. Discussion that is on Road to Dubai from G20 to COP28. The panel will be chaired by Ambassador Manjeev Puri, who is a distinguished fellow at TERI. We have a lot of people joining us for this panel. First, we have Ms. Jayashree Nandi, who is an environment correspondent with Hindustan Times. We have Ms. Archana Chaudhary, who is also a climate journalist. We have Ms. Karen, who is advisor with the International Climate Initiative in the German government. We have Dr. Nityananda, who is Director, Council for Social Development. We have Mr. Subhashish Dey, who is Director of Climate Policy and Finance at the Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation. And lastly, we have Mr. Arun Krishna, who is Manager at the Climate Policy Initiative. I welcome you all, and over to you, Ambassador Puri.
So thank you very much. So can I just sit and we can all sit around and chat? That's okay with you guys, or should we get up there and speak from there? This is okay, isn't it? So look, we are so many of us and we have only 1 hour. But I also intend to put the onus on all of you. So you also need to contribute something, ask something, and push us a little bit. So what is the idea here? The idea here is to have some people
who are not just doing what has become pretty regular in many parts of the world, which is I speak, you listen. This is a case of I speak, you speak, we listen, and we take this forward. And what are we looking at? So here we have people who are observers and those who are influencers. In the previous lot were perhaps those who need to be doers, government-related or not related sets of people. I want to set the ball rolling straight away. And I will ask these questions to my colleagues, intermittently, from those who are in the business of observing versus those who are in the business of influencing. COP28 in Dubai. Whether we like it or not, the politics of the world is not going to be divorced from it. That is something we need to understand. There is also a geography. But let's leave that aside. For us who are involved in sustainability, climate, and other things, let's focus on our areas. I don't know how many of you were here in the previous session and how many of you paid attention to the speech of the Deputy Chief of Mission of the UAE government. I'll tell you why it's worth all of you going back over what he said. This gentleman is not an old hand of climate negotiations. So he wasn't standing here and ad-libbing as I might be doing. He was reading a prepared text, duly prepared by his government. And so therefore what he said is in general reflective of what the government of UAE, i.e. the COP presidency, is thinking. And therefore an important set of statements. He made several points, basically touching on all aspects of a possible agreement. But he made major points about money. He made points about lifestyles. He made points about how we should do things. And I want to tell you, despite all what we had thought about the UAE, an oil-rich country, he made one very important point. We need to recognize the irrefutable end of the fossil era. Please recall, these were his exact words. He then went on to talk about coal ending a kind of sunset situation, unabated petroleum also finding things difficult, etc. I think let's pay attention to that. Let's pay attention to another thing, this loss and damage and operationalization of the fund. If you recall the end of October, I think this the meeting before that, everybody was despondent. And if any of you follow Avinash Prasad, who's perhaps been one of the leading lights pushing all of this action, it was a very despondent Avinash Prasad who got up and said, nothing is happening. And yet, to the credit of the UAE, they were able to take things forward. After all, the structure is agreed. And I must say, we must accept this. Again, something which the UAE Deputy Chief of Mission said. The reality is what? And Lavish Kumar, I think, said this very well and said it very candidly. What is the reality? The reality is that things have shifted in the international negotiations and the international burden sharing paradigm. Climate change, and Shelley, I take you back to your charts that you've got, was a common but differentiated scenario. The loss and damage things simply uses the word common, by the way, if those of you who haven't read the final text. Where is the issue of differentiation? The crux of the issue of differentiation is a very simple thing. Again, I take you back to Lavish Bhandari and his opening words. The changing world and the emergence of the large developing economies, India included, China, of course, way ahead of all of us. Today, I don't know if we can even club them along with developing economies. This is the crux of the matter. And the shift which has happened, which is perceptible and clear, is that the burden sharing has now perceptibly moved. Paris had already said, do what you can, voluntary actions. But now, even in terms of money, we have shifted considerably. That the call is barely for asking the developed countries to take the lead. Old words, but not even said with the kind of force. In fact, the last text, and I don't know if I've seen the final version, almost called on the large developing countries to become contributors per se to this particular fund. The United States and its statement has been hugely reported all over the place that what is this business that you haven't said that the contributions are going to be voluntary. And please remember, Secretary John Kerry in his last deposition before the US Senate making it crystal clear that no acceptance of liabilities, no acceptance of blame, no acceptance of assessed contributions, etc. from our side. I think these are realities. I'm going to turn to my colleagues. Let me start straight away from you. Nityanand, let me ask you. Let me ask those of you who are, understanding, influencing, and trying to take these things forward. So let me ask you, what do you think is the point at which we are today? Because the COP is now just 3 weeks away. And what is it that we can hope for? I'm afraid, as the chair, I have 10 minutes, you have only 5. They are yours. And I will stop.
Thank you, TERI and Saili, for inviting me. We are at a very crucial moment of history. We agreed for something in Paris, but if you look at the stock-taking report, it says we are not on the right path. But there are some fundamental questions that I would like to ask. That can we tackle the climate change problem with today's technology? The answer is a big no. So we are depending on technologies that are yet to come, and we expect and hope that we will get some good technologies and all our problems will be sorted out. It's a hunky-dory situation is coming. It may come, it may not come. We don't know. So should we leave everything to future technologies? So that's a big question. Number 2, do we have adequate access, especially in developing countries, to even today's technologies, which can not solve all the problems, but solve a lot of the problems? Again, the answer is no. You talk about loss and damage fund. Yes, at least something has been agreed. That's a positive thing. But we agree on structure and content we don't even know. So we don't even know whether people are willing to really access this liability or giving. Now, look, it can look that yes, it has been agreed, that's a good thing. But who agreed and who did not agree? The question again is the developing countries who were not keen for having World Bank as the institution, they agreed. So in a sense, they come, right? On the other hand, who was very keen, the US, who's most of the time elephant in the room, starting from Kyoto Protocol, they had their way. So now World Bank, at least for a few years, will be the institution. So, it shows the developing countries are willing to, here one, I fully agree with you. We are in a situation where these developing countries and developed countries, this distinction, differentiation is very blurred now. Developing countries are not the same. At the same time, developed countries are also not the same. US, Europe, and all other countries who are considered developed, they are not the same. Not only in terms of what they have been doing, but also in terms of their intention. Not all are same. That is important to keep in mind. Now, that's where what India has been pushing, especially since G20, earlier also, that life is very important. So if we are not able to solve with current technology, future technology are unknown, life is something that is we can fully depend on. We know that this is a no regret policy, and this is good for our health, this is good for our society. Now all the things that we talk about life are all good for human society. Now if I take one instance as a kind of broad indicator, if your per capita electricity consumption is less than say 2,000 kilowatt hour per capita, per year, then your human development is pretty low, right? Then you keep on increasing, say up to 4,000, it rises gradually. And then after 4,000 kilowatt, you increase your, consumption, your HD, your human development doesn't increase. So this is the crux of the solution. That's look, good quality life, good human development possible without going for 20,000 per capita electricity consumption. Countries are doing it, and countries can do it, and those who are using 20,000 kilowatt, they can see how other countries are managing it within 4,500 and yet manage to have good human development. This is where I think is a solution. Technology will come. Technologies are good thing. Another point I think I should make a note here. Look, if we look back at the history of human civilization, we came up with problems and we found solution in technologies. Then we realized that those solutions are also creating another kind of solution, problems. Now, all the problems that we are saying that technologies will solve, we are not sure that the new technologies which are being adopted very fast, the new technologies which will come, they will not create further problems. We are not very sure. Again, life is something that will not create further problems.
Thank you, Tata.
Right?
If you don't mind so that we can take the others too.
Yes.
Made a very valid point.
No, you're absolutely right. We don't know that the technological solution will find a solution. But the fact is, we did have a problem earlier. Remember that. So let's not underplay the ingenuity of the human brain. Karin, I'm going to turn to you. I'll tell you why I asked this to be put up. Have a look at this. Frankly, I don't know where they got their data from. I don't believe that Germany ranks at 34. And I don't believe that the United Kingdom ranks at 59 or whatever it is in this indexing. No, so I'm going to come to you. I am going to come to you on this. Look, I think, Nitya, you made a very valid point. If India is at 100, fundamentally, Shelley, what it shows, we're a poor country with low consumption. It doesn't show anything else. And no matter what we talk in terms of what Sachin Chaturvedi said, new measures, frankly, there's no measure better than GDP in the oldest form. It is the best measure. It is the best aggregate measure. All other measures are, bells and whistles around it. You get that act together, frankly, the richer countries, everything is fine for them, isn't it? But when you look at this particular chart, note one thing. Karan, this is the question for you. The chart has basically most countries, starting from Mexico all the way to Germany, in the 50s range. These are all OECD countries. They're all basically in the mid-range. And the outliers are India and Indonesia, relatively poor members of the G20. And you have the United States of America, which is God knows where. I don't know the answer. But I want to ask you, and I have also just 5 minutes. What are your key expectations in terms of what everybody in the previous panel talked about? The North and the South working together for doing something tangible, achievable tomorrow, not day after tomorrow, in terms of climate change, which we can realize at Dubai.
Thank you. Yes, exactly. This is how nice. What can we do together? I think the urgency of now, this we all need to feel, and this is what we all need to work on together. Yes, Shelley, in a way, we are already moving from billions to trillions, just in the wrong direction. And it is the cost of inaction that is plundering the world, plundering the rich as well as the poor countries, each and every year more and more. So this is where we are going really to the trillions. And because so many very important and bright things on big politics has been said before. Again, according to your question, I think this is what we need to keep in mind, the spirit of what we can actually do together. And this is, of course, reflected in big politics, but it is also reflected country-wise and community-wise. Yes? Now, in very bad air, but also in summer, I wonder, why are there so little solar panels in Delhi as well as in Berlin? Yes? And this is something, a lot has been said about finance, and yes, of course, this is a big point, and I also don't know whether the developed countries will ever deliver on their promises. But another aspect to this is that finance follows firm laws and enforced rules, be it on consumption, be it on carbon markets, be it on product requirements, and so on. And I think this is actually the one rather hopeful outlook for all of us. Yeah, and concerning the solar panels, actually, India is more advanced than Germany. So still, I wonder why there are so few solar panels here, which would also be good for the bad air. And now, lifestyles, yes. The problem with this is, please, nobody denies that Germany is our individual footprint and so on is still 7 times, 11 times of what the average per capita Indian. But India has a 350 million middle class, which has consumption patterns just as bad as ours, may I say, or in the US, yes? But they are also the ones who can invest into solar panels, just to give this point. And again, of course, I don't want to put all the blame on the consumers or all the action upon the consumers, but this is still something we have to stop this waiting for each other and everybody else to do something on a country basis, on a political level, but I also believe on a individual level, and that would be something. Yes, thank you.
Karin, thank you very much. I think very good point. People in the south and people in the north, if they interact, learn from each other, many things can happen. But you know, we are talking about international negotiation.
I just wanted to clarify on the index. We basically took per capita consumption in transport, per capita consumption of energy, per capita consumption of final energy in transport, residential sector. We also took plastic waste generated per capita, and then in the food sector, we couldn't get that data on food wastage, so we actually took meat consumption. And I know there does introduce some bias. So,
Anything you divide
Yes.
by 1.4 billion becomes very small.
absolutely.
This
Yeah.
is just the nature.
Shelley,
It was per capita.
Shelley, let me say this. As the chief statistician here, you have the right to do what you've done. We only need to recognize that you are the chief statistician. That's it. Arun, I want to turn to you. And then I'll turn to the observers here. And next round is going to be you, all of you. Huh? So get ready. Arun, you have 5 minutes. Please be very practical in terms of what is there for the negotiations, not what should be done to address climate change. Because you are all observing. And let's not go beyond the text. You know, what should happen is a different matter. What is on the table? What can we do? Where can the North and the South come together? Loss and damage fund, there was a compromise. Massive compromise by the South. But maybe many of those countries think the compromise was worth it. I want to hear from you 3 points. You have only 5 minutes, please.
Sure, sir. Okay, so I come from a project finance and a climate finance background, and less from the negotiations and diplomacy background. So I'll answer from this lens. Okay. So what can be done practically, right? So, and I've been listening to the previous panel and, some bit of this panel as well, that, finance is a very tangible, very specific output which we can have, right? So whether, loss and damage fund, I've been following what has been happening, and the World Bank has taken up the responsibility as a trustee for the fund, but that's the easy part, right? The key challenge with the L&D fund is that there are three questions here. Okay, who will be funding, what will they be funding, and how do you distribute the funds, right? So who will be funding is not a straightforward question to answer, right? Because of course we can call upon the developed economies to do it because they've been responsible for most of the historical emissions. And of course, the least developed countries, which have been the recipient of the damage because of this, have a right on those funds, right? But how about transitioning economies like India and China? As Karen mentioned, we are 1.5 billion people, and each of us, although the per capita levels of consumption and emission is low, at an aggregate level, it's pretty high. And also the middle classes, we are consuming, we can see that the amount of emissions and the amount of plastics, etc., it's increasing. And pretty soon we will reach Western levels of waste generation and so on, the middle classes, right? So does transitioning economies have any responsibilities in the L&D fund, right? So this is a question which we have to confront sooner or later, because till now, we have been saying that the developed economies have to pay, but what about us, right? Number one. Number two is, what are the instruments or the modalities of in which the funds will be distributed, right? So one of the instruments or modalities is interest rate, suspending payments during an event, catastrophic event, which is fine, that can work. But how about catastrophe insurance, credit guarantees, interest rate subvention, or concessional interest rates, and so on? These require the North and South to work together, right? These are not easy to implement. They require the North and South to work together constructively, so that a whole host of financial innovation can be done in order for loss and damage to be taken care of. And finally, who will get the share of the funds, right? Again, small island developing states, the least developed countries are an obvious candidate. But beyond that, again, I bring in India into the picture. India has many countries in one country, right? So you have states which are comparable to sub-Saharan Africa. You have states which are comparable to, a middle-income country. So if a catastrophe befalls, let's say, Odisha, for example, right? So can we draw from the loss and damage fund? Or let's say a country which is, for example, like Pakistan, right? Will they be a recipient or will they not be a recipient of the loss and damage fund? These are some of the questions which have to be answered, and I hope the COP negotiations will help answer them. But I've taken the example of L&D fund to answer your question.
Arun, thank you very much. I think you were very prescient, what you just said, and we need to talk a little bit about this loss and damage fund. But I think more importantly, you said something about money being a win for those who get it as well as those who give it. Without that, in large scale, money will not work. Karen, you made a very important point. You need to have laws, you need to have stability. That's how money moves. And I'm not talking about aid. I am actually talking about money flows, which is a different matter altogether. Jayashree, as someone who has been observing, sometimes there, sometimes here, but those who observe perhaps note much more than those who are in the room. Because those who are in the room sometimes don't even notice what is happening on their left and the right. We noticed this in Glasgow in the last hours as things happened. I want you to take just a few minutes and tell us what is your thoughts on the way the power play is moving along in global climate negotiations. Because frankly, whether we like it or not, what happens on climate change is a different matter. That's about global perceptions. What happens in these negotiations is about global power play. And that's exactly what is on display there. So Jayashree, love to hear from you.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be on this panel. I look up to Ambassador Puri all the time. After every COP, I ask him and discuss what does this mean. So this time I'm on the other side, and I'm just going to share a few thoughts with you on what we are reporting on and what we are observing. One of the things that I think is very important is that we have already breached the 1.5 degree goal temporarily this year for the first time. And this year, there is an over 99% probability of 2023 ending up to be the warmest year on record, according to NOAA. So with this as background, and also since June, the sea surface temperatures and the air temperature has been at record high. So clearly we are heading towards, catastrophic consequences. So with this as backdrop, I was observing what was going on at the loss and damage meeting, the transitional committee meetings, and we had the fifth meeting because in the first four meetings, there was no resolution. It couldn't end with any kind of, progress. In the fifth meeting, what was very interesting is that if you notice that developing countries made a huge concession. They did not want the fund to be located in the World Bank, but they said, okay, fine, we are going to, in the spirit of compromise, let's just locate it in the World Bank for an intermediate period. But US, in fact, only US till the end, I was following the entire meeting and the plenary, the US kept saying that we want clarification that contributions are voluntary. And they wanted a footnote. In fact, the text does say that it is voluntary contribution, but even after that, they said that we want a footnote that it is voluntary in nature. So as somebody who's following these negotiations and reporting on them, I see a lot of fear of climate reparations, that the things are coming now to liability and the question of legality and how you will be held accountable in future. What will be the consequences of this fund? Say there's a huge extreme event which causes massive losses. Who will be the primary contributor to how will that damage be covered? And what has come out in the text, unfortunately, is quite weak. If you look at the funding mechanism, it's not very clear that the developed nations are primary contributors. In fact, it has a variety of sources. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Are we going to see development in COP28 on this? I think is what Ambassador Puri can throw more light on. But this is the power play. I think the polarization has reached a very severe point. It's at the crescendo right now, and there's also conflict in West Asia, which is also there in the backdrop. So I think this year will be critical, both because we are now likely to breach 1.5 very soon, even though it's going to be temporary. $100 billion haven't come through, the long promised $100 billion. Maybe this year it's going to come through, but it's clearly not enough. And NCQG, so what are the discussions on NCQG? After saying no to loss and damage funding, are they going to come on board to pay more money through the NCQG? I doubt that. So those are my thoughts.
Very well said, Jayashree. You doubt it. So do we. And we have always doubted right from the very beginning. But that doesn't mean we don't have to make the effort. Because the threat is real. We know there are elections in the United States in 2024. We know the consequences of these elections after Kyoto. We know the consequences of these elections after Paris. Isn't it very coincidental? Shubhashish, no coincidences. Let's get to the real meat of the matter. We have to do something. And whether we like it or not, a global challenge demands a global response. The South, the North, the East, as someone put it, we all have to work together. We have little choice in the matter because it is our future. What is it that you expect? We are only 3 weeks away.
Thank you, Ambassador Puri. My expectation would be that in COP28, we would let democracy to play a bigger role in climate negotiation. And I'll give a example to what I mean by when I say democracy to work. When democracy work, there is a essence of compromise and letting go. Letting go of certain liabilities which you would like to be taken ownership of, but at the same time might not be as critical and important to the larger goal of achieving what we intend to achieve. And I'll give you an example here. So Karin made a point on Indian middle class and Indian middle class consumption. So in a democratic framework, if I and Karin were negotiators from two different countries, and we are from two different countries at this point of time, and if I were from India and she is from Germany, and I had listened to that, if democracy in play, I would have just kept quiet. But in a other way of negotiation, which often happens when we go on those negotiation table, I would have come up with numbers, and there was a research done by Center for Science and Environment, which actually showed that 10% of India's highest income bracket and the 20% of the lowest income bracket of USA, their per capita emission is comparable, around 4 to 6 tons per capita. So those would be then going into confrontational discussion, and discussion which eats into the time which the 14 days which offers to all of us to get into a roadmap for what to do next. So that's what I'm saying. To me, democracy at work would be the way forward for climate negotiation, and we need to take the ownership and understand that not everything will be solved in 14 days, and we need to let go of things which are not critical and important and focus on things which are critical and important for all of us. Over to you.
Shubhashish, you said very well. You used the word democracy. Why do you think the developing world was not willing to let the loss and damage fund be housed in the World Bank? What do you all think? Why was it not willing? I want you all to think, and I'll tell you the reason I want you to think. Because I want you to internalize these thoughts and not just say that these 5 people said this. Why do you think they didn't want to? The UN is more democratic.
The US.
No, the United Nations is more democratic.
No. I think the US will make major decisions for the World Bank.
No, you're absolutely right. So what did the developing countries want? Where should this fund be housed? Madam, choices have to be on paper at least, isn't it? Look, the reason is very clear. At the bank and the fund, the United States has the golden people. At the UN, they have hell of a lot of power, but they don't have it de jure. The thought is that it would help. But I'll be very honest to you, and perhaps I'm a contrarian. And it is not because the president is my classmate. No, not because of that. I'm saying so because let the fund be housed where there is expertise. Do you all remember the Green Climate Fund? Do anybody even know where it exists? Those who can't handle money and finance, believe me, let's develop the capacities. Me, a middle class boy, shouldn't be given 8 figures to handle. I'm being a little honest about these matters. So I think the developing countries took a practical decision. They wanted the fund. But you're absolutely right. Look, democracy is the essence of what we are doing, isn't it? If it's global governance. But Arun, you asked the question about subnational access. I don't know. The words that have been used are countries. not communities. The only time where peoples as a word has been used has been in the G20 communique issued out of Delhi. Otherwise, the words have been countries. So I don't know and I don't think so. In any case, the funds corpus will be so limited. And your situation of a country like India is such that you can't sit in the G20 and ask for a contribution. I'm afraid that's the reality of life. Archana, as someone who, along with your entire team, are those who have been observing this not from today, but from many years, and you have, let me say, a consortium of observers, what is it that you think? And let me ask you a more specific question. Please give one particular point or two of them that you think a country like India should pursue at Dubai.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me here, Terry. I'll come at it from my training as a financial journalist, and I've been observing all of this from the perspective of finance. So the one thing that I think makes this particular COP extremely important is that I think over the last few decades, all the COPs that we have seen, we've discussed various issues, and I think it's finally for the last 2-3 COPs, or rather even from Paris, we've come to the conclusion that nothing is going to move till money moves. And this is a COP where it all comes down and gets blocked in this funnel. And now we're actually talking, we're down to the brass tacks, we're talking what really matters, climate finance. The problem here, as a journalist that I have observed, and I think Jayashree will agree with me, is that some of the things that are puzzling is that there is no definition for certain things. We talked about loss and damages, and we talk about adaptation. There's no definition of what exactly comes under adaptation. For that matter, we don't even have a clear definition for climate finance. So if we don't have basic definitions in place, what are we really arguing about? And that is something that needs to be put in place first. For the last 2 years, now we had a committee that was actually sitting down and working on the definition of what falls under adaptation, and hopefully that comes out now. And this particular COP, I think, is going to be where we are going to watch for how countries behave, or what they're willing to give and what they're going to take. And the loss and damages fund, if those negotiations are anything to go by, it's going to be challenging. Especially because, as someone said, the elephant in the room is the US. And that's going to be something that we're going to be watching. We'll have to watch. It's going to be interesting to watch how these negotiations pan out. But as far as what India should pursue is what it has been doing. I think the G20 was a very good indication of the way the Indian government has been approaching this problem and thinking about it. And it was very heartening to see that the communique actually put down the billions to trillions that we've been talking about all this while, was actually put down in an international document in which, countries agreed, where the 5.9 trillion or whether it was a 4 trillion a year. And that is something that India needs to push for the sake of the global south also. So that is something that we'd like, I think we'll be watching. And the other thing is the MDB reforms. Because yes, the World Bank has the capacity, the capability of managing these funds. But I would disagree that it's the rich boy who should get to manage the funds. Yeah? Just because we're middle class doesn't mean we don't understand how those capacities are to be used. I would argue that we probably understand it better than the rich guy, who is, we are trying to tell them very politely through, I think, the life policy, that there is another way this can be worked out. There is another way this can be made possible. And that is something that India, I think, should continue pursuing, to convince the world that there is another way to do things, or rather to convince the rich boy in the room who is not listening to others, who wants to keep the toys, that he needs to share a little bit. Because the loss and damage funds, I think that is where we need to see, that is what showed us how challenging this particular COP is going to be. But that's my view.
Archana, excellently put. And I liked your bit about the rich boy or the rich girl for that matter. But do remember The Chinese, in their huge quest at global dominance, are the largest investors in US treasuries. These are the practical realities of things. You know, we've got about half an hour more. Shelley, how much time do we have? 20 minutes. None of you want to ask any questions. Thank you very much for making at least some intervention. None of you have any questions to ask. Come on. Must be something that irritates you. You don't. But I want to tell you, we have made no mention about a word called adaptation. Thank you, Shelley, that in the first thing, at least in your presentation, you mentioned the word adaptation and you spoke about the global goal for adaptation. Why isn't it on the agenda of the presidency? It was supposed to be, isn't it? There are many good things which are on the agenda. Yes, ma'am, I'm going to come to you. There are many good things which were on the agenda, as the diplomat from the UAE mentioned to you. Money, energy, fossil fuels, many of these things were there. But why was adaptation not there? And consider one fact. Given that the climate has already changed, given that many things are in any case going to require adaptation, even if today we switch off and we have a COVID across the world, you still are going to have to adjust. What are we doing and why are we doing it? And the last point I want to draw your attention to from the speech of the UAE diplomat was this issue of methane as far as and India and what it means. We tend to completely forget it. We just forget this word and move on. So we'll come to all of you in that. But you had a question, please. Thank you for this.
Thank you. I think listening to both the panels, the one thing that resonates with me is that there's huge amount of work that needs to be done. I think you asked a question early in the discussion that can we tackle climate change given the current technologies? So technologies were not there when we were in the cave era. Technologies perhaps are not even going to be there once, you know, everything hits the roof. But the point is, and I'd like to quote Mr. Nanda, who said, it is the intention. Without the intention, I think none of us can really come together at a country level, at a community level. And I'm going to also cite something which is rather unreliable. That's the Dunbar number, which says 150, if you look at the community formation or the community development level, 42% chances that people will start taking care of each other. I think we have it in our DNA to really develop solutions in a state of crisis, which is where we are headed. But what we are fundamentally missing out on is who are all of us? We are people guided by our behaviors. When we talk about well-being, when we talk about hard switchovers at an industry level, at a national level, I think it is the behavior that goes unnoticed most of the time. And I think it is the behavior towards life, towards each other, towards challenges, towards certain solutions that needs to be relooked at, revisited, and possibly, I think we need a greater sense of endurance when we talk about frameworking, because every framework comes with a shelf life, but we are trying to identify and recognize certain certainties that we can move ahead with. That is where we're going wrong. Despite the fact that we've got billions and trillions earmarked, we would still go back and make the same mistakes that we made when we did not have the billions and trillions, but we had problems to solve. So I think that is possibly something to consider, something to look at, something to digest, and something to be authentic with. And I think that is possibly the mindset and the heart set that can move us into a probable short-term solution, because long-term solutions are not possible. Like I said, they have a shelf life. So I think what we need to identify definitely is in-depth, 360 degrees, broad-ranged, broad-based life cycle assessments. When we look at life cycle assessments in any given domain, may it be human beings, may it be the industry or any engagement that we are a part of, I think that is what really gives us the direction of how we're moving and how we should move. Thank you so much.
No, thank you very much. I think you made a very important point. And isn't that an underlying theme of our entire two panels here, which is lifestyles, life for sustainable development. What do we do in terms of sustainability? You're absolutely right. And I think we need to also recognize that the answers are not necessarily quantitative, but also need to be qualitative in terms of what you do, how do you do it, etc. But let me also make one other point to you on all of this. Technology, money also follows lifestyle. I'll give you one little example of the hard world, the economics. Try raise money for an unabated coal power plant today. Now, I am going to give you the floor. Madam, that is perhaps the largest in terms of aggregate footprint answer of lifestyle change that has taken. That's the way the world moves. And I'm afraid that's the way things do happen. And so we do see this happening. Karin, I was in your country last year and I was delighted in summer to see that the German government had mandated for €9 unlimited travel for 1 week across every form of public transport in Germany. You think it would have happened if it hadn't been for an understanding and a mind shake? The Greens party today, which is part of the government, is perhaps less committed to environmentalism than the Greens party when I joined the diplomatic corps, when it was led by people like Joshua Fisher, etc. Today there's greater practicality there. Yet they agreed because the mindset changes there. So Karin, I am going to give you the mic, but after that I want everyone to speak on adaptation for a couple of minutes, especially what can be done at Dubai before we close here. Karin.
I very much liked your point, try to raise money for XYZ. And I think this is a major takeaway from G20, India's presidency. There's a new focus on circular economy of G20 countries, and this time not only on the green energy or hydrogen side, but on the material side, which is responsible for 45% of greenhouse gas emissions. Only 55 can be contributed by the energy side. And I think this is the question. Try to raise money for a steel plant with green hydrogen and recycled steel. This will make huge impact. Now, to the adaptation side, this is also true. Try to raise money for adaptation finance if you don't have rules. As I said before, finance follows laws and rules. And I mean, I really find it difficult to do this. There are more than just one elephant in the room, and there are more than just one rich guy in the room. And if Saudi Arabia can pay 300 million for an Asian football star, I mean, why isn't it here? And so on and so forth. But it is also, why would countries get from the adaptation fund? Bangladesh is doing a lot on adaptation, also with finance from outside. Pakistan is doing almost nothing. So now they have had this disaster. Will they be kind of, compensated for doing nothing? That's all these questions. May I just raise this? Sorry.
Karin, very well put. Yes, I will come into you. There's something very interesting. We are speaking here about trillions, and this G20 communique mentions trillions. Do you know what the MDB reforms report actually mentioned? 392 billion. This is the Vera Songwe Nicholas Stern study and its reportage. That's why I'm saying reality matters. Reality is also important. We need to understand that. Sir, you.
We have like 10 billion. So population is expected to be close to 10 billion by 2050, right? How much work is being done to maybe reduce population growth, or because that is going to be a critical factor, right? If suppose people are not going to reduce emissions, how do you tackle and how important is this in discussions at COP?
You remember Lovish Bhandari mentioned just this particular point. The increasing footprint, the human footprint, not the carbon footprint. No doubt about that at all. What would be the answer to all of that? And what is this a matter that needs to be discussed at the COP? In some senses, you would say, is this the global negotiation point, which is discussing every single global problem under the earth, because everyone has some kind of a carbon footprint? I want to draw your attention to one very specific thing. We're sitting here and actually pontificating on the future of the world. Important. That's a very nice way. But go to anything on biodiversity, you think the discussions are any different? Do you think the discussion on the Israel-Hamas war should not be along the same lines, global, the world is going here and there, UN population fund discussions, they're all like that. But therefore, when we talk about the COP, we need to be a little bit more focused. What can be done in the very specific area of greenhouse gas emissions and their abatement and their impact? That's what we are talking about. A good world, a better world. I agree with you. Nobody. It's motherhood and apple pie. No one will disagree. What do we do in terms of actual burden sharing? Let me say another thing to you. What are UN negotiations? They are about international burden sharing. They're not about doing the right thing or the wrong thing, etc. They are about international burden sharing. And what will you do? And issues of liability, etc. are important, whether you state it or not. Acceptance of, that's why the word is not used liability, because that has a legal connotation. And instead we use the word responsibility, a lighter word, but meaning I will heave as much as we can. So let me take just a minute each from each of the panelists before we close, because the issue of adaptation is central to the developing world. Not that it is not important for the developed world either, but somehow or the other, it keeps slipping from the global radar screen. And Shelley, should it be a priority of India to put it on the COP's agenda, just as loss and damage was put on the agenda by countries which had suffered huge loss and damage during the past year? Arun, I start with you, then we'll do some switch here and there.
Sure.
Just a minute.
Okay. CPI, Climate Policy Initiative, does a report called Global Landscape of Climate Finance every year. It maps out how much money is flowing from where to where. And the latest report shows that 5% of global finance flow, only 5%, is going into adaptation. That's around $60 billion per annum, right? So what would be required in this COP? One is, of course, as some panelists mentioned, the definition, the taxonomy, a standardized taxonomy, right? So we are coming up with our own taxonomy that's going to take its time. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it will be an adaptation of us, probably the European taxonomy or something. So, countries should do it quickly. So perhaps there should be a centralized taxonomy which countries can adopt quickly. So that is how finance will flow. Regulatory. So again, while regulatory aspect of adaptation finance is individual to each country, perhaps some frameworks can be set so that, for example, the ambassador was talking about how subnational entities cannot access, MDB financing or something, right? So why should that be? There's no reason why they can't access, no reason why ULBs can't access MDB funding and so on, right? So regulatory reforms and also measurement and climate budget tagging, right? So again, if some progress is made in to influence countries to measure and tag their budgets, measurement is the first step in order to get more finance, right? So if these three things can be done, then it would be extremely useful.
Arun, thank you. I think these are very important points. And for those of you who are somehow connected to the world of finance, believe me, taxonomies, which is another word for rules. What exactly stands for what you want? It's just a long word, but it basically means let's have clarity on what qualifies, what will actually do it. Regulatory. You're very right, Karen. If you don't have regulations, you keep changing every day. Who's going to put money there? You won't put your own money, let alone somebody else investing somewhere else. And remember, the single biggest cost of moving monies from the developed world to the developing world is what is called country risks, hedging, foreign exchange risks, to use the most basic word. And that remains the single biggest problem, to which, frankly, everybody acknowledges The MDB Volume 2 report has a whole chapter on that, but really no answers to it. Let me leave a little thought with you. Climate change is a global problem. Developed countries must act because even now their carbon footprint is enormous in absolute terms and certainly in per capita terms. Developing countries. You know, if we just made a list of 10 developing countries, and it has nothing to do with their carbon footprint, since I'm including India in it, even those with low carbon footprint. And if we look at these 10 countries from the developing world, whose aggregate emissions, for whatever reason, size, population, any factor, is the largest. If we can take some kind of greening action which does not impact their growth potential and their development potential, and certainly technology and money would have to play a role in that. This by itself would have the greatest global benefits that we are looking at. What do you need for that? You need fundamentally technology. In a sense, its development is dependent upon what happens in the developed world. You saw it with COVID. Vaccines did get developed, didn't they? And that's how things happen. But money and flows of money become absolutely critical. And that's one of the areas where things can be done. Because if in these 10 economies, greening action becomes a profitable action for these countries, including those who give, in a sense, you could be looking at a win-win, small w maybe, but you would be looking at something good. Swashish, I need to turn to you, Nitya, you, and then we'll have those who are really looking at us with a hawk eye.
Thank you, Ambassador Puri. When we talk about adaptation, we often take a lens which is like adaptation is all about building infrastructure. Adaptation is for building for climate severe events which is going to happen tomorrow. But that's not the case. It's happening now and here. And to me, the biggest tool to overcome those climate adaptation challenge is creation of wealth. Creation of wealth within the country and creation of wealth for the population who doesn't have wealth. I would second what Ambassador Puri has said, that the focus should be on how to make finance flow from global north to global south. We have seen in past 1 decade the percentage of finance flow from global north to global south, which is the percentage of the savings or global savings, is reducing, not drastically but reducing. What it means that the wealth creation in countries like India and Bangladesh is happening at a slower pace. And we all know at the end of the day, if we are facing a severe climate-induced event, if it is a flood or a drought, at the end of the day, it is us and our family who had to fend for the challenges which we'll be facing. No country government, no international organization would be able to make us survive beyond maybe the initial couple of months where they might come and give you some relief. But you would necessarily need to have wealth available with you. Wealth, and then again, along with wealth, you would also require skill. So 2 points, skill and wealth, these are the two things which needs to be developed, created to overcome the adaptation related challenge.
Absolutely right, Shubhashi. If you have the ability, then all you need is the willpower. You see it happening in front of you, you will have the willpower, but you also need to have the ability. Very well put on the issue of wealth creation. You know, about 25, 30 years back, when apartheid ended in South Africa, this word wealth creation was a global buzzword. But now nobody talks about it. And the reason is very simple. Wealth creation is now taking place in the countries mentioned by Subhashish. The others have already created enough wealth. And so it's not fashionable. But doesn't matter, we are not talking fashion. We're talking about things which are existential to our society, the way we are, and taking ourselves forward. Nitya.
Thank you. See, 20 years back, if there was a cyclone in Odisha, probably 1,000 people will be affected. Now there's a cyclone, probably 1.2 will probably 0 death. So we have done substantially well in responding to this, climate emergencies. But then somehow we have not given adequate attention to emergencies of future, which are kind of creeping in. Like, I think our focus should be on adaptation in the sector of agriculture, productivity, and related is water supply. These are the two areas where we have to give huge attention to ensure that future climate adaptation we can take. I would like to comment on one thing you did not ask. Since the topic of today has a subtitle G20 to COP28. G20 had an agenda of democratizing these global financial institutions. And why? Everybody knows that G20 originated from the global financial crisis. And one diagnosis that was made that why this crisis could not be predicted or prevented is that IMF was not able to do its job properly. And why it could not do the job properly? Because it was not democratic. It was not able to make harsh comments against particular countries. So crisis continued, kind of built up. And it was an agreed agenda in G20 that both, IMF and World Bank, there will be reforms to make it more democratic. There have been some reforms, but not to the extent that it was agreed in G20. Because G20, after all, is a kind of talking club. It has no legal mandate in that sense. Now, reforming now. So now we have agreed that World Bank would be the fund. Even after 4 years is continue, I would not have problem. Probably if democratization is happening. So we have to focus on that, democratizing this to prevent future crises also. Now, with adaptation mitigation we're talking about, I think one thing is that without often realizing, we often get into the problems which are occurring in some developed countries, especially in the American part. Like, to give one example, you don't see megacities in Europe, the way you see in other parts. Now, megacities means that the average distance that a person has to travel every day for work will be longer. And that means your energy consumption will be higher for travel. You don't see megacities beyond Paris and London. Even Frankfurt would be a small town compared to Indian megacities. So we are building megacities. Even now, we're allowing growth to, we're saying Delhi and Jaipur will be one city. I think that's something we should stop.
Very well put. I think the whole idea of urbanization is an idea which tends to escape us. But actions, let me again make this point to you. Nitya, you made this point about Orissa and the cyclone and what we've been able to achieve. Let me give you a little counter to that. 20 years back, we would have had a large number of deaths, but the total value of property that would have been destroyed would have been a few millions. Today, not a soul lost, but the total value of properties destroyed runs into billions. I'm afraid that's the reality of the world in which we are. But you made a very valid point about urbanization. I, for one, believe that on many of these subjects, we need to try and learn what we can. You mentioned the European continent, but it's a continent where populations are stagnant. You are having this migration crisis in Europe, not because all the other countries are on fire. That's not true. That's also true. But it's fundamentally happening because of the pull factor. There are no people. You need people. I just spent a month in the United States. Not a single shop window is there without saying, hiring, please apply. And do you know what the rates are being given? Nobody is offering less than $20 to $25 an hour. This is for so-called unskilled work. These are the realities of things as things are happening. But let's turn to the two who are observing. We should put global goal on adaptation on the agenda. Jai Shri Nandi.
So I just remembered what Mr. Bhandari was saying, that there is the absorption of funds. Let's for once imagine that we've got all the money, that we are looking for, that we are asking for. But how are we planning to use that money becomes key. A lot of slow onset events are now becoming very, very critical for India. And I see, as a reporter, I see how people suffer during extreme heat. And months together, there is no discussion on thermal comfort. How are these millions of people going to get cool roofs? What kind of houses are being built at a very rapid pace, but how can those houses be made comfortable? How can those schools be made comfortable? I think a lot of inward thinking is also needed, and the thinking needs to be very innovative, considering the slow onset events are also increasing at a very rapid pace. So that's my personal way of looking at adaptation. Adaptation has no definition as of now, as of today, but you know very well what is adaptation. And if you have suffered in 50 degrees, 45 degrees temperature, and then again coming back to 2 degrees and you're outdoors without heating or indoors without heating, how do you manage? So that's going to be a key challenge for developing countries like us. I think those are my thoughts.
Thank you very much, Jayashree. We're going to now undertake some adaptation. Sir. Just speak up, please. Just more. Okay. Please identify yourself.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Bartosz Przywara. I represent the European Union. We have just started talking about the European continent after a lot about the US. So let me maybe pick up the topic. I'm very new here in India. I'm just here 2 months. It's a really exciting adventure so far. So let's hope to have a good collaboration with you and with many other colleagues here. Thank you very much for organizing this very interesting, very good debate. So just to start, so you, of course, your discussion here really concentrates on money, on financing. Fine, I understand, of course. So that's why I just as a very beginning, I would like to say 2 numbers. That the European Union, the member states of the European Union, our development banks are by far the biggest climate finance contributor in the world. So we have in 2021 we have spent 23 billion euros. We are also contributing to these global efforts. As far as we know, this 100 billion collective pledge per year will be reached this year. So yeah, we are doing our best. We are trying. But what we have seen in your slides is that we are the biggest also contributors to the pollution, to the CO2 emissions. So in absolute terms, per capita, whatever. So at the end, what counts most is that we do our homework. No, first. Like if you fly in the airplane, there is always this information. First, put the mask on yourself, and then take care of your child. No, so we are putting the mask on ourselves. We are making a big effort at home. We are cutting emissions. We are Fit for 55 program. We have established it already 2 years ago. So we basically commit, and we are on the right track to cut our emissions by 55% by 2030, and to become carbon neutral by 2050. So at home we are doing our job. Then of course we need to help the others as well. But it's not only about of course money is important, but it's not only about money flow. Here we have 2 very important elements. One is money, one is investment. Another one is change our regulatory framework and change our the behavior of both the producers and the consumers. And here in Europe, we have established 2 very important components. On the side of the producers, we have established our emission trading system. Emission trading system basically it has a cap It has an absolute cap which covers all the industry, all the producers of the European Union. And once this cap, okay, basically this cap cannot be overpassed. And once the cap is closed, then the emissions become more costly. And yeah, you know the system. So basically what we are doing here is to push the responsibility for the financial responsibility for politics to the polluters. So again, what is important, I think a couple of people have said here that however money you will try to mobilize from the public sources, it will not be enough. That's why we need to go into the market. We need to go into the producers, into the industry, and let them deal with this issue. And we let them deal with this issue through the regulation, through the laws which impose certain behavior. On the other hand, I'm finishing. There is also the consumer side, and here on the consumer side, again, you mentioned there is the circular economy. There's also the big program, big strategy in the European Union to impose circular economy. It's a circular economy. People are changing their behavior, are changing the consumption activities, and it's difficult because we are used to consume, and now we are not anymore allowed to consume. We have to repair, we have to change, we have to recycle. It is quite important for people. It's quite a big change in the mentality. So yeah, so it's just to conclude. Yeah, we are trying to move money, to flow money into the developing countries, or to help developing countries to change their policy. But we are also doing our homework, and that should be also acknowledged and seen. So thank you very much for your attention.
No, thank you very much. May I say welcome to India, welcome to Delhi, and welcome to TERI. Let me assure you, you are in an institution which is truly a friend of the European Union and your delegation. We've had the pleasure of hosting your president, vice presidents, and many, and are very familiar with what you're doing. Your leadership matters. And let me tell you, the world counts on this leadership. What we are hoping for is that leadership will decisively help tilt balances too. You will have to admit that of late it hasn't been as strong as it was in the past, but that's beside the point. Archana, we are coming to an end. I'm going to ask you. Yes. Look at two things and comment. One is adaptation. How much should we push for adaptation at the COP in Dubai? And secondly, what should be our worldview on what the UAE diplomat said? The irrefutable end of the fossil era.
I think, can you hear me? Yeah. So I think the second part of your question is kind of the statement that you made, quoting the diplomat. I think that in itself is the biggest adaptation. Moving away from fossil fuels to adapt to a new energy system in itself is the biggest adaptation. The thought that I had, again, I'll wear my financial journalist hat and I'll say this. I think we've been looking a lot at penalizing polluters. Instead, if we changed our focus and said, how do we incentivize the adapters? And adapters, by adapters, I don't just mean nations and and governments, but also, for instance, municipalities who are whitening the roofs of their homes in really hot spots. If they could be incentivized when they raise funds for this, or if, just like we're doing this to companies, carbon emissions, we know CDP, for instance, gets information from companies every year on emissions and how they're managing their risks. If we look at how these risks are being managed, the looking at it itself, that is adaptation. What companies are doing to change their ways is adaptation. If that can be incentivized, instead of saying polluters pay, if we said turned our turned the kaleidoscope a bit and said, let's incentivize, I think that will make a difference to how money and then consequently policy flows, because ultimately everything follows money. So that's my thought.
Archana, very important point. Incentivize. Penalization is always supposedly a way forward, but let's incentivize. I think we're all in great agreement on that. I'm going to end now. I want to say thanks to TERI, my colleagues, Shelley, and our entire team, which was wonderful in putting this together. Thank you very much. Please give me a minute. We'll make everybody laugh a little bit also. I want to thank Jayashree, Archana, Karen, Nitya, Subhashish, and Arun. This is wonderful to all of you who contributed, and more than that, to those who didn't contribute. Thank you very much for all of this. You remember Lavish Bhandari mentioned something about some practical things that can be done. And one of the things that he mentioned was not to supply water in the morning. Now I'm going to tell you a little story. You know, now things have changed a lot. We are all going overseas and young kids from India are traveling all over the world. But in the 50s, even early 60s, when young boys and girls from India would go, especially to Great Britain, to study in universities there, they found that the rental that they were charged for their little apartments that they rented was invariably a few pounds per week higher than what students from other parts of the world were charged. Somebody protested, but recently one of our senior retired bureaucrats who was there in the 1940s wrote about it. He said he delved into it and found out, and the landlady said, the reason is you guys have baths every day and you have it in the morning. So, you know, I'm not sure we'll be able to turn the water taps off in the morning. I don't know what that means. Mr. Sachin Chaturvedi was talking about retaining culture. I don't know which culture we are going to be going into. But all the very best to you guys. Have a great time and hope to see many of you contributing to Dubai in person, virtually, or in every other way, because we owe it to ourselves, we owe it to the world for a better world. Whether it's technology, whether it's money, whether it's the way we do things, lifestyles, every single one of them, everything counts. But what we seek above all is international cooperation. Sir, you have led, but you need to lead even stronger. All the best.
Thank you, Ambassador Puri and the panel. Now, I would request Shelley to give a brief information slide on WSDS and to also give the closing remarks. Thank you.
It's just a short 5-6 minute presentation. It's not like a very long presentation. So I just want to thank every one of you, and including some members of the diplomatic community based in Delhi who are here, who have taken time to come even despite this really bad air situation that we have. But just wanted to know that we will be organizing a few of these virtually as well. Perhaps after Diwali, and one more after COP. So this is just to give you an overview as to what we have in mind for one of TERI's flagship initiatives called the World Sustainable Development Summit. It was instituted as the Delhi Sustainable Development Summit in 2001. And through this initiative, we aim to drive not just ambition, but commitments and action on sustainable development and climate action. So one of the USPs of the World Sustainable Development Summit is that it is the only independently convened platform that is dedicated to the topic of sustainable development and climate action based in the Global South. The summit is designed as a platform to pioneer conversation, to drive global commitments and actions. It also serves as a platform to exchange knowledge, and of course the headline global agenda being contributing towards achieving the sustainable development goals as well as the goals of the Paris Agreement by encouraging informed and collectively driven actions. Also, the next WSDS is going to take place in a year when TERI, the institute, will be completing 50 years of shaping past, present, and future. And just to give you a brief overview of the summit series, we've had over the various editions of the summit 56 heads of state and government participate, 126 ministers. A lot of this has been possible because of the diplomatic community here. 13 Nobel laureates, 1932 business leaders, over 3,000 speakers, and close to 40,000 delegates. And this just depicts the heads of state serving as well as former, along with Nobel laureates who have participated in various editions of the summit. I just wanted to mention that over the last 3 editions of the summit, we've been getting messages by the Prime Minister of India. For this year's summit, we've invited the President of India. Of course, we're still to hear, but also delighted to share that just as on yesterday, we have received the confirmation of the Environment Minister for the upcoming edition of the summit. And we will request each of you to kind of help us, to ensure that your country is present at the summit. And this is the statistics just of the last edition of the summit. We had more than 1,200 in-person delegates, 2 heads of state and government, 48 sessions, 278 speakers, 23 of them being like ministers, not just from India. Partners, 25 partners. We also had exposition booths. We had a media coverage of more than 2,000 on various platforms, means social media outreach. We pay attention to social media outreach as well as dissemination through website, newsletters, etc. Unveiling the theme of World Sustainable Development Summit 2024, the overarching or the umbrella theme as we call it is leadership for sustainable development and climate justice. Ambassador Puri also of course highlighted why leadership is important, and leadership of many countries, blocs, it's all very important. And it's more important now because we are confronting like 3 challenges. Of course, the planetary crisis, which includes the triple planetary crisis. But the second is the sliding back of sustainable development goals. And it's the first year this time that we saw that, some of the key social goals sliding back. And third is the conflict situation, which is growing and it's threatening world peace and could very well lead to the not prioritizing of environmental action. So we think that leadership and stewardship needs to step up even more than before, and thus this theme. And we'll continue to focus on the interface between SDGs and climate action, and of course, environmental stewardship in a challenging geopolitical context. Some of the sub-themes of WSDS 2024 is adaptation and resilience, nature and ecosystems, addressing the energy trilemma, sustainable consumption and lifestyles, integrating sustainable development, as well as climate action. And just wanted to introduce the International Steering Committee. We have a fairly international and diverse panel, ranging from the far east to the west, and they are here to kind of guide us. But we also need your guidance, and this is just a slide depicting the various features, including plenary sessions. We do have ministerial addresses, special sessions, or thematic tracks, and we continue to focus on outreach. This is just a provisional agenda or WSDS structure that we have as of now. We will be circulating the these slides, so as you can see that the first is more dedicated to like TERI at the rate of 50, but it has topics that will deliberate on integrating sustainable development, a ministry on climate action, energy trilemma, as well as financing, and that clearly came as a very important theme. And the second one is going to be more on specific topics such as adaptation, resilience, as well as nature and ecosystems. And the dates we will be focusing on stakeholder engagements, looking at youth, women, business, and finally also having a ministerial on a theme which is very important to the government of India, which is lifestyles and consumption, and of course the validation. And of course for the diplomatic community present there, and for the rest of you, firstly, please be there. The summit is going to be held from 7th to 9th of February 2024. We hope that the weather is better. I mean, the air is better. better. The weather is definitely going to be pleasant. Then it's just going to be the end of winters, and it's going to be before the summer sets in. And for the diplomatic community present here, firstly, thank you so much for being here. Please send us any high-level speaker suggestions at the head of state and government, ministers, Nobel laureates from your country. Also, we encourage any delegation visits from your countries if you want to please help us spread the word. And of course, participation from your embassies, delegations themselves, any chance of being a country partner, or you want to add into a fun element of at the summit, whether it's a food counter or a cultural counter at the summit. So all of you are welcome to contribute to that as well. So that's the last slide, and just wanted to say that we will continue to be in touch with you on that and follow up on these and any suggestions that you have in the coming days. And other than that, we will be also organizing more information sessions in case you need to have more clarity. And of course, we are happy to interact over lunch. And I think I'd just like to end here. But on the last point, which Ambassador Puri had raised on adaptation, I just feel as an observer also, as a researcher and as an observer, not very long ago, we heard that a lot of the countries and influential countries in the global north say that we didn't recognize adaptation because in a way it would mean that we have accepted defeat and we have to focus on mitigation. Unfortunately, we think we are now even leapfrogging that, because now you're having countries saying that limits to adaptation is crossed. IPCC has said that hard and soft limits or adaptation is crossed now. We need to talk about loss and damage, and the outcome which we have got is without the liability compensation. So how can you leapfrog adaptation? You have to bring adaptation back. And so that's all I think. And please proceed for lunch.
I thought, Shelly, what I was hitting was that you stop having baths. Thank you so much, everyone. You carry on. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.